Well, good morning, good morning. You know, you're going to hear it, just great to be back on the island, and this time I really do mean it is good to be back on the island. It's the first time I've seen green grass since December. Forgot what it looked like. You guys are way ahead of us, so that's excellent. So thank you for having me, and it'll be an enjoyable stay here. So today we're going to look a little bit at natural areas or unnatural areas. Which do you have and which do you want? This talk is sort of based off of a presentation I gave back in the fall or early winter. We talked a little bit more about natural areas and looked at some of the management, especially some of the weed management programs. Well, I promise I'm not going to get into the weed management that much or any of the real technical issues of maintaining these natural rough areas. Today I really want to introduce the fact that, you know, natural areas, it can be a tool to really make your golf course more sustainable. But there are a lot of misconceptions with these areas, and they do require maintenance. And I think it's important to really know what you're getting into and how you plan these and set these up to make them successful and make your golf course more sustainable. So here's a quiet little area, probably not all that different than what many of you have at your own properties. It's Dedham Golf and Polo Club just south of Boston. Pretty much a mix of native grasses. You can see the little blue stem, the purplish color. There's some fescues in there. There's some other forbs or broadleaf plant materials. It looks like a pretty low maintenance area. Put the mower away, maybe cut it in the spring. We saved ourselves a lot of money. Golfers love it, right? Well, that little area, that probably acre and a half of no-mow, naturalized rough area, isn't really all that natural. There's probably 5 applications of something put on that area every year. Multiple applications for insects, surface insects, grubs. Might be a full-scale herbicide application, some spot treatments in addition to mowing. So as we go forward, just remember, they're natural. They're no-mow areas. They do have their benefits, which we're going to look at, but they do require some management. There are a lot of different naturalized areas, and one of the things that we kind of lose sight of on golf courses, I think when we talk naturalized areas, our focus, our attention goes right to grassland areas. Well, those are the most prominent ones. Those are the ones that gain the most attention. I saw them grassland or savanna type areas, treelands, and this is where there's more opportunity. These are more visual. These are the ones that really do impact play more, but there are other opportunities. Dave mentioned a couple of them, and I'll look into them too. Meadowlands, just meadows, more of a progression from grasslands, allowing more plants to come in. These offer a whole lot more diversity, probably a little bit more interest, more color. The trouble with these tend to be more thick. You're going to have a different set of maintenance programs. This is the type of area that you use to attract more wildlife, maybe pollinators, birds, things like that. It's probably not going to be right down the center or the closest areas to your rough area or to your high play areas, because these tend to be thicker and a little bit less maintenance. They're going to be further off in the perimeter areas. If you go further east on the island, you get on the Cape, you know, coastal lands, you're going to get scrubland areas. These replace grassland areas in many cases. A little bit more difficult to play. They're usually oak, scrub, and different plant material. Some courses spend a lot of money to try to get away from scrubland and return that back to grassland area, which is really misguided. The area wants to be scrubland. That's what it should be. That's what nature intended it to be. Because it's a little bit unplayable, I've seen these areas get renovated, cleared out, and then replanted with fescue. So it's possible you can do that, but it's certainly not a real sustainable practice and not something that I would recommend. But that's one type of natural rough area, naturalized area on a golf course or any area. Wetlands, buffer strips. Buffer strips Dave mentioned. Real important around your ponds, but even wetlands alone, they're very natural. Your aquatic systems, your ponds, they can be natural areas. We manage them. There's some aesthetics, obviously, to all these areas, but these can be real natural areas. Same with creek beds. We call those riparian areas. This is a spot up in Jay Peak where, if you know Jay Peak, we got a lot of mountain streams. So this little stream looks real meek and mild. You go there in another probably 3 weeks, or well, this year maybe another 6 weeks, and they're going to have some tremendous snow melt and some huge runoff problems. They purposely went in and planted this stream bed to stabilize it because they're getting such tremendous washouts. So they also restructured the stream to try to terrace it down, to slow down some of that velocity because the stream was just getting blown out. So they did it out of necessity. A real important functional naturalized rough area. A lot of golf courses can't do these. It depends where they're located, but real important, and they should not be discounted. How about woodland areas? I think these don't get any attention in many cases. They can be some of the prettiest areas on golf courses. As a group, we go out, we recommend a tremendous amount of tree work. Obviously for turf, for playing areas, and for growing environment issues. So it's huge. But in doing a lot of the thinning and so forth, these are good opportunities to have some kind of woodland, again, savanna type areas. Get some of the natural understory in there, and it can be aesthetically pleasing. Not easy to get these to look good. In fact, the further south I go, it seems like it's more difficult to get these woodland areas in good shape. They quickly get overrun with invasives, or deer browse takes out a lot of the plants, and you're really limited to what can grow in some of these areas. So it's a tough spot, but a good opportunity. So what are some of the benefits of these naturalized rough areas? Ideally, we say reduced inputs, and they can be, for sure. Especially with water and fertilizer, they shouldn't be irrigated, maybe to get them established. They really don't need any fertilizer unless it's brand new or it's being renovated and you're trying to reestablish it. Hopefully chemical reductions, possibly, maybe not. Depends again how they're going to be managed and what you're striving for. And certainly mowing. At least you're not going to have to run the equipment out there every week or every 2 weeks. You can get away with maybe mowing it once a year on an annual basis. Some you might have to mow a little bit more frequently, but a good way to maybe cut back on some of the mowing acreage. Tremendous opportunity for habitat and wildlife, as we discussed. And then the other side of that is just building the soil. If you've got a real weak and soil that's prone to erosion or just poor quality, this is probably more of a farming thing, but you're building organic matter, carbon sequestration, if you want to put it that way. But really, you're just developing a stronger soil, better structure, healthier, and improving the environment, and that reduce. So a good way to reduce erosion. Curtis Cup. I mean, Dave showed pictures, and I'm sure all of you are quite familiar with some of the good and maybe negative effects of wildlife on your golf course, but I just think it makes the property a whole lot more interesting, and I know most of the golfers that I interact with on visits are real pleased, proud to talk about some of their abilities to attract, whether it be bluebirds or turkeys or even coyotes in some regards, or foxes and what have you. Just to bring more wildlife out on the property makes it a whole lot more interesting, and these areas are certainly important for that. I did mention erosion and protection, and these areas are real important, and anything we can do to protect the water quality, it just goes a long ways for us. These areas, if they're naturalized buffer strips, can prevent water from running in, so you get wash-off erosion, but real importantly too, fertilizer migration and even pesticides to some degree will stop that movement into some of these wetland areas. And these buffer strips also help to shade these aquatic environments, which is beneficial. So real things to look at. What about some of the design impacts and aspects that these offer? Obviously, they can be challenging, sometimes over-challenging. They can really give you risk-reward opportunities, which in some cases we have trees do that for us now, and trees are not very good risk-reward options. Usually they pretty much end that. So with the removal of trees, maybe a placement of a new sand bunker, or extending a tall grass area, you can easily replace the tree and maybe resurrect a risk-reward that's been lost and it's being returned. So these areas do offer that opportunity. I like them because they do set up some great definition and some contrast with your well-maintained fairways. It's spectacular to look out over, as you can see, and really see the defined, well-maintained areas against more of a naturalistic appearance. So more interest, more aesthetics, and all that. But, and here's where we get into some of the misconceptions and some of the issues with these tall grass areas where I think clubs get into trouble. Quite often they're not placed properly, and they're too penal. This was a course that I worked with this past summer, the picture on the left. They have a naturalized rough area that's being irrigated on the left side of the bunker, certainly you'd be happier to be in the bunker than the hazard than you would in that bank of tall grass rough. That's a lost ball or unplayable ball if you do find it. Not real fair. Somebody hits it in there, and that was a daily fee course. You can imagine what that did for business. And I look on the left side of that cart path, which is way out of play, and they're spending time every week, every other week, mowing that area out. I'm like, well, I think you got your priorities a little bit askew here. And then impact on pace of play, which Hunk's going to talk about in a little bit. But you know, if they're not placed properly, you will slow up play. I mean, there's no doubt about it, and you'll take away a lot of the pleasure for golfers. Well, somebody said no place is safe on our golf course. People are hitting everywhere. Well, that's true. I think there's some reasonable planning that can be done. You can't protect everybody, but we'll look at that a little bit later. Positioning these areas really does have an impact on how they're perceived. The other thing that I think is a challenge, it can overcome with education and good communication, is just there's a perception, especially if these things are just put out there without any real thought, is, you know, what are you trying to accomplish? To me, I look at that picture and I say, that looks fine. That's a naturalized rough area, as it should be. It's nice and thin, more or less. It's a grass. It looks like a waste area. It's not a mountain stand. Yes, you do have some plant material in there. Now, some people would say, God, that looks unkept. Are you guys lazy? As Dave said, would you put the mowers away for the week? Just send everybody home? How come you're not maintaining that area? And I think that's something we have to deal with. So my idea of something that looks good, looks natural, aesthetically pleasing, might not be the same with a lot of your golfers. Take it up a notch. This is a naturalized rough area. It's more of a meadow. It's perfectly acceptable. That's what a meadow should look like. Well, that's not the meadow that I had intended. I wasn't expecting to see goldenrod. It's pretty once a year. I don't want that. So you have to figure out what your golfers, what your bosses have in mind when it comes to a naturalized rough area. And it's going to dictate the maintenance that you do in some of these areas. So again, what's perfectly acceptable to one person isn't always the case. Here's the misconception list that I usually think holds true, and it always has right across the board here. But naturalized rough areas should be mono stands of this nice wispy fine fescue. Maybe a new golf course, you can do that. You know, you're starting from scratch, you're renovating, you site these things where you want them. You get the right soils, no irrigation. Yeah, okay, we can possibly do that. But most courses aren't able to provide that. They're always thin and wispy. No, they're not. If you happen to be growing on a sandy site, an old quarry, out on the east end of Long Island, maybe on the South Shore where we have more sand and sand bluffs, you have poverty soils, absolutely. You can get thin and wispy fescue and native grasses. You come up on the North Shore, you get up into Fairfield County, you get inland, soils get better. We're growing forage crops, we're growing hay. Don't call them wispy anymore, call them hay fields. That's what they are. They're going to be thick and more dense. It's going to increase the level of management that we have to do with them. If that's what everybody wants, thin and wispy. Do they reduce maintenance costs? Well, I did a quick survey, probably 5 years ago now for an article. So these numbers aren't going to be exact. I didn't update them at all. But I went to a lot of the fellows around the Boston area and up there of what it costs to maintain, what they're spending on some of these areas with their chemical costs and with their labor for mowing. And it was all over the board, as you can see, but it was about $260 to $500 per acre to maintain these naturalized rough areas. Now, some would argue, well, that's just their choice. They really aren't, they're natural, they're not natural, they're unnatural. They're really maintaining a higher level of area. Well, that could be the case, but realistically, that's where the demand is. So, it's a, you know, they do have to be managed. I think that's the only thing I'm trying to, that's the take-home message. Don't think you can go in there and make 10, 12 acres of naturalized rough areas and think that you're going to significantly reduce the budget. In most cases, you don't. You might for a year or two, but it evolves back into a pretty busy, well-maintained area. And if you don't, they do become unsightly, unplayable, and the program will fail. It doesn't take many of these areas where you're going to see the mowers come back out. People are going to get disgruntled and say, we don't like them, period. Hopefully you have a longer range management program and plan, and again, you know what the members want, and you get it. So where do these things work? Where do these naturalized areas, where and when and how are they effective? Well, they're effective when they're done with a purpose. They're done with a goal, with an objective. Now, if your goal is to reduce maintenance, that's fine. But have people know this is what they're going to look like. And if you can accept that, great. Maybe there's certain areas on your golf course, the further we get away from play, a little bit less visual, an area that isn't quite so visual, that is really going to be hands-off, and we are not going to do a minimal approach of weed management. Annual mowing, it is what you is. It is what it is. You hit it there, good luck. It's like hitting it in the middle of the woods. You're not going to find it. We get closer to play, maybe you have to pick up the intensity of maintenance. So site them properly. That really is the most important thing, because how they're sited, whether it's the type of soils that we have or what their impact on play is going to be, that's going to define how much maintenance you have to put into these areas to keep them up. And wherever play impact is minimal, it's going to be obviously more effective for most of the golfers. And understand some of the maintenance requirements. Now, naturalized areas are best suited for these difficult to maintain sites, whether it's a real severe bank or slope, something that you really requires more manual labor to cut on a regular basis, or maybe a heavier duty Steiner type machine, something like that. Obviously, non-irrigated acreage is really the best option for these areas, because if you can allow them to naturalize, you're probably going to have a healthier stand of plants, you're going to have more organic matter in the soil, and you won't lose your soil. In environmentally sensitive areas. That happens to be Cape Breton. Anybody get up there, Cabot Trails? Has anybody had the opportunity to play that? It's a fescue, talk about sustainable golf course, in some ways it is. Fescue greens and fescue fairways and kind of banded dunes east. It's a hard place to get to, but it's worth the trip. They're building another one up there, so it's going to be real interesting to see how that works out for them, but it's pretty neat, sweet spot. I think these tall grass and native areas, naturalized roughs, whatever you'd like to call them, if you've got a rough area that is on a play more or less, the soils are scruffy, rocky, bony, what we call in New England, you have rock outcroppings, no irrigation, minimal traffic, it looks god-awful, mowed. These are ideal spots for tall grass areas. And this is where I would start small. I would target these areas. Once they get accepted, expand them out. Location, location, location. Now, I'm not going to argue this is Port Rush. No problem. I'll take that forest carry anytime on this Power 3. But really, it depends on how they're located. So long forest carries typically aren't going to be very popular. And when you do have them, be flexible. You might start out with a longer forest carry, but if you have to cut, you cut. You just bring it back out and keep it playable. Short right's never a good thing in any endeavor, and then high cart traffic areas, areas of not just golfer traffic, but areas where you run a lot of carts through. These areas are just going to get matted down. Even if they might not come into play, they're going to become unsightly. So probably not the best places to start if you're trying to be sustainable and trying to really minimize your inputs. Site them and avoid some of these areas that are going to impact play. I was speaking with an architect yesterday up in Lake Placid who actually is using Google Earth, and he's using like a GIS system with some of the courses he works with to try to map the golf course, which you can do on your own. And I thought it was a good idea. He's trying to come up with some distances off the center line of a fairway to say yes or no to tall grass areas. He's actually trying to mark areas that would work and probably have less of an impact on play, which once you're in the field you would adjust those outward. I thought that was kind of neat. But with the data loggers that Hunky's going to talk about in a little bit, kind of a neat technology. You can track where your golfers are. You're going to find these hot spots. Obviously, you can see where the traffic's the highest, that's where you're going to avoid. For these aren't really well suited for tall grass roughs, and if you do put them in there, know there's going to be quite a bit of maintenance. So what are some of the maintenance needs? Again, location dominates a lot of what you do. There's going to be some mowing, basic mowing, to keep these areas under control, to keep the woodies out, and then there's going to be some weed control. On top of that, there'll be some insect management. I hate to say it, but it's a reality. I don't know how many in the room that have these areas are spraying for ticks, but I know in New England that's pretty popular now. Again, perception is everything. You don't want to walk in a tall grass area, not that they're the best habitat for ticks, but if there's a chance of them, they're gone. So those are some of the things you look at. Areas that really dictate your maintenance as far as your site goes, so I already mentioned irrigation, but what about drainage areas? If you've got wet areas and you want thin and wispy and pretty much an area free of weeds, or you want a monostand of grass, you really should avoid these wet areas because they're not going to give you that. They're going to be harder to maintain. It's going to take a lot more work to keep them clean and open. Know what the plant material is and the proximity to play, and then, as I mentioned earlier, visually. You know, if it's coming down, you see something from the clubhouse, or maybe it's the front drive, the visual importance of that is going to be much higher, much more pressure to keep that cleaner and more maintained than an area that might be further out on the perimeter of the property somewhere, where you could probably be more aggressive in promoting different plant material, and maybe more suitable for wildlife habitat and so forth. So really pick these areas and choose. Just basic mowing once a year is very, very common, a necessity. Mowers are good weed control. Some courses will actually do a spring cut as well, especially if there happen to be heavier soils when we get some rain. They'll let that first flush grow and come back in, cut it, remove the debris. By doing that, you hope that that second growth that you get, maybe it's a little drier, comes up a little thinner, and it's much more playable. So that's the way to go. Flail mowers are big. This is the Weiderman Super 500. The Kesmick was one, but any of these that you can use as a flail are durable. You can take out blades. You can use it as a thinning device, and not. This is a shot of Fisher's Island, one of the primary areas just off of the primary rough that they used. They use the flail to go in there and try to thin it, maybe once or twice a year to keep it playable without changing the appearance of the rough area. More than just knowing the density is going to be a management concern. Mowing will dictate what grasses are out there. You can use mowing as a tool. You change it up. The more frequently you mow, you're going to push more grasses. If you want to push a native grass, which are summer grasses like little blue stem, mow the cool seasons right through spring, and let that little blue stem, you'll give it a competitive advantage. And by July and August, you'll have that type of grass, plus you'll keep your areas playable. Again, this changes. We're getting away, we're heading up the maintenance, and we're mowing more. So there's not one set program for any area. Controlled burns is another opportunity, like a mower. You'll see this probably further out on the island. Again, Cape Cod, Martha's Vineyard, places where they're more used to controlled burns, and they have fire marshals that go along with it, agree with it. It's a good way to get rid of thatch. It's a good way to get rid of some of the annual grass weeds and seeds, and it really does promote a certain type of grass out there. So it is a tool, management tool, to keep the woodies out. It's just another means to try to keep these areas thin and playable and sparse. I just threw this in more of interest than anything else, but believe it or not, the cycle continues, You get up around Boston now, there's a company that's offering sheep and goats on a per day cost. They drop them off, they give you the electric fence, they give you the watering cans, and they're all yours. You can put them where you want. You laugh, but something, the damn goats, they love the rock outcroppings, which takes a hell of a lot of labor to put people up there to try to clean these areas off. They'll go for multiflora rows. Nothing goes after multiflora rows, and those are really scourges of some of these tall grass roughs. They'll even eat that the dewberry, the blackberry, which I haven't really found much that will kill. And they'll probably get rid of deer tongue grass, which is another nasty one to try to control. So, you laugh, and it's probably just more of an interest sake. A lot of the golfers like to see the sheep out there and goats and such, but I thought it was kind of an innovative idea for someone to come up with. Ultimately, there's going to be some herbicide management. Again, identify your objectives. There'll be broad scale applications, and then there'll be a lot more spot treatment applications. Hopefully, the amount of herbicide work that you have to do really is going to depend upon what your golfers want and what you want as a manager. I tend to like to have things a little bit more diverse and have more plant material, but if it's a really high play area, or people just don't like that, then there's going to be a lot more herbicide inputs. Hopefully you can do it on a priority basis, target certain areas of the golf course, areas that might need more control. Maybe it'll just be a band around fairways to keep those areas clean, and as you progress further away from the play areas, they won't need all that attention. You can do an awful lot of good work through spot treatment applications too. And it's a more manual labor, but you can reduce your chemical inputs by just going out, hand pulling weeds, using the mop and bucket technique, or wick applicators, or backpack sprayers, and just target individual plants that are starting to become too numerous. So again, it just depends on the location, what your golfers are looking at. Have a maintenance plan. I try to emphasize this with clubs that I have. They'll say, oh man, we're glad you're here. We've got these tall grass areas. We really don't know what to do with them. Can you just give us a basic plan for these? And I'm like, well, you can, but I tell you, no, you really can't. They just vary from site to site and location on your golf course. So, like I mentioned earlier, there are certain areas you're going to target. They're going to be higher priorities. They're going to require more maintenance inputs. But as we get further out, there are spots where they won't require that. So don't have a uniform program right across the board. Really customize your maintenance. Know what you're trying to achieve. And, you know, in areas, it's great to promote some diversity, get some different plants coming in here. I think it just makes everything that much more interesting, and certainly much more beneficial for wildlife and pollinators and such. Here's an example. This is abandoned trails actually. And what I was just trying to focus, sometimes you can see it better in the picture, but there are areas of this golf hole that are certainly going to be higher priority, whether it's a speed of play issue and even visually. You know, maybe 15 yards out around the green complex, 20 yards out, maybe further, depending on the type of membership you have. Those areas will be managed for tall grasses, and they'll be managed to be kept playable. So they'll probably be maintained more frequently, mowed more frequently, to try to get that point. But as you get further away from play, that's when you start getting into some scrublands, maybe more shrubbery, even a few trees here and there, try to create different layers, different kind of more structure, more texture to the landscape, and a little bit more pleasing to the eye. So don't look at 60 acres of rough areas the same. It's not. Break it down into acres, and that's one way to try to keep these things a little bit more manageable without and still keeping them somewhat natural. So I figured there's no better way to end than with a shot from Gullen. Naturalized areas can be mostly natural, and they definitely can. Just plan them properly, know what you're trying to accomplish out there. Realize that there is going to be some maintenance, so you're not going to get away scot-free. There'll still be inputs. The communication aspect, the education aspect are super important here. A lot of these areas have failed because the golfers didn't know what was being accomplished. It was the superintendent's idea to do it. It might have been superintendent and a few members of the green committee who played a golf course. They loved it. Another place with these naturalized roughs, they always wanted to do it. It'll work, but let people know why you're doing it, what the purposes are behind it. Start small. Learn. There's a lot of maintenance that goes on, potential maintenance with these areas, and it's maybe not widespread, but you have to know what you're doing, how to manage it, and what's out there. And then be realistic. Know that there is some maintenance, and that there are going to be some cost associated with maintaining these areas. It's a good opportunity to make the golf course more sustainable, more interesting, more desirable to play, but there is some management with it. So with that, I'll say thank you.